Okay, thank you. Hopefully we're live now, and everyone's been let in. I'm just looking at the participant list, and I think lots of people are in. Perhaps one or two more to come, but we'll hopefully see them in just a moment. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Downs, Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Biology. A really big welcome to this evening's event, Engaging with Parliament. It's the third in our series. I think one or two of you would have been involved in the previous two. Before we get on to the main discussion this evening, I just wanted to say a big thank you, as I have done on the last two occasions, to all of our membership, all our colleagues across the bioscience community for all the work that's gone on in the past and at present, which has allowed us to have such an effective response in terms of the current pandemic and the role that biology has played. So I think we can all collectively be proud of what the subject's been able to contribute to the problems we've been facing recently. And if I could, a big shout out to our member organisations. Again, some of you are involved today for the work that you've been doing. And the British Society for Immunology had their #Explore Vaccines event today. I think that went really well. So there's lots of great material out there on the BSI site, the BPS site, and Wellcome, and many others. So if you're looking for information which is aimed at explaining the issues to friends, family, and so on, you're not sure where to go, there's plenty of information out there, so do have a look at those organisations and others to pass that on. Also talking about future events and engaging with parliamentarians, just to let everyone know that on the 8th of April between 5 and 6:30 in the evening, there's going to be hustings talking about science policy for the forthcoming elections for the Welsh Senedd. So that's been organised by the Learning Society of Wales, but it's in partnership with ourselves, the Royal Society of Chemistry and the Institute of Physics. If you'd like to participate in that and put questions to all the political parties about their policies around science, engineering and technology in terms of the Welsh election, please go to our website or one of the others where you can find out how to register for that event. Today's event is also available is going to be recorded and will be available later on. So if you are asking a question today, please use the Q&A function. Can I ask you to try and keep it reasonably brief and concise so we can sort of understand what the issue is and get through them. If you do put your name, that's fine, and of course your affiliation is also fine, but just be conscious that we're recording it. So if you're on Twitter, the hashtag is a hashtag RSB Engage Parliament. That's hashtag RSB Engage Parliament, and the Royal Society of Biology handle is @RoyalSocBio. So that's the background for today. I hope that you'll find this event useful. I'm sure you actually will. Carol Monaghan has been a great friend of the Society and of Science over the years. And I'd just like to say a few words about her background. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with her. I know looking at the attendee list tonight, we have lots of people from Scotland, and I'm sure there'll be a Scotland flavour to some of the things which come up. Carol was first elected as an MP for Glasgow North West in 2015 and again in 2017. And she joined the Science and Technology Select Committee very early on in 2015, and apart from a very short gap, has been on it continuously. She's the longest serving member on the S&T committee. And unlike our two previous guests, Catherine Fresher and Mark Logan, she's actually been able to spend some time in the Houses of Parliament because they were much more recently elected. She's of course a member, her party is the Scottish National Party, the SNP. And as many of you will know, she was a physics teacher for many years before entering politics, and has been involved in the work of Science of Parliament for a long time. And just to say thank you, Carol, for all the work that you've done in supporting science and the work and events that we put on. I know most recently you were involved in Voice of the Future, and I think that you were probably the only person on the Select Committee now who was involved in 2016, where we were delighted to have another first when Major Tim Peake joined the Voice of the Future Select Committee inquiry from space. And I think that's the first time anything like that has ever happened. So you've certainly been involved with us for a long time. You've served under 4 chairs, I think, on the Select Committee as well. So a lot of experience to talk about. If I can invite you to turn on your camera and your audio and say a few words of introduction, and then we can move to the Q&A. So Carol, thank you very much for joining us and welcome.
Thanks very much, Mark, and it's really good to be joining you tonight. I've had a pretty mad week in Parliament this week, so this is a nice way to finish off my official duties for the week before I do more things around the constituency tomorrow. Yeah, as Mark says, my background is as a physics teacher. I was a physics teacher for about 20 years in Glasgow, mainly in comprehensive schools in Glasgow, but also had a couple of years in a private school. So I've kind of seen it all in terms of education. I worked for the Scottish Exam Board, Scottish Qualifications Agency, for a couple of years as a consultant as well, and spent a bit of time at Glasgow University training teachers. So kind of been there, done it, as far as teaching is concerned. And the last thing I expected to be doing ever was anything to do with politics. I was always quite political, but I always said anybody that wanted to be an MP should automatically be disbarred from even putting themselves forward for it. So it was a bit strange that I found myself in 2014 putting my name forward. And the reason for that was I'd been campaigning for independence for Scotland. We had lost the referendum, and I decided that I had to get more involved. It wasn't enough just to be kind of an activist. I had to be immerse myself more in this. And I thought that I would probably combine politics and education and do some stuff about political education for both SNP members and wider population. So that's where I thought I was going, except at that point the SNP were trying to increase diversity. So they had there was a decision taken that every selection process must include at least one female, and in our constituency we couldn't get a female to stand. And I'd asked all sorts of women to put their name forward. I mean, we're talking doctors, lawyers, people, people running their own business, and they kept saying, oh, I couldn't do it, oh, it's not for me, oh, I'm not good enough, I don't know enough about it. And a few of them said to me, why don't you put your name forward? And I said the same, I'm not good enough, I don't know enough about it, it's not for me. But finally, I think I cracked, and at the 11th hour, when we still couldn't get a woman to put their name forward, I stuck my name in the hat. I had to go through a selection process. There were 5 men and me, and I won the selection process, and found myself then campaigning for Westminster. And in May 2015, probably 3 months after I'd won the nomination for the constituency, I found myself elected. And the first thing that happens when you walk off that platform that you've seen on the TV, you walk off the platform, there's somebody there from Parliament who handed me a brown envelope and said, welcome to Westminster, Miss Monaghan. And I thought, oh, good grief, what have I done? So that was my introduction to politics. I knew nothing about Westminster. I knew very little about how legislation was formed. I knew practically nothing about select committees, although I'd probably mentioned it as a teacher, but I hadn't really ever got to grips with what a select committee involved. But there it was. I found myself being asked by our whips, would I be willing to sit in the Science and Technology Select Committee? And I thought, well, that's the one for me, clearly. So I did that, again, not knowing much about it. But very quickly, what became apparent was people that I would talk to my pupils about in school, I was actually speaking to directly. I was able to, have Brian Cox in the committee and talk to him about physics issues. I could speak to him afterwards. I could email people that in prominent positions that I would never have had access to as a teacher. And suddenly I started to see the importance of the committee and sort of the role that it could play. It's interesting, many members of the public don't know much about committees. Some do, and often there's inquiries that we will do that do catch the imagination of members of the public. And I would say some of the stuff we've done over COVID over the last year has certainly generated a good bit of interest, and we've seen it reported on in the news. For example, who would have thought that we would have ourselves on the news asking questions to Dominic Cummings and getting responses from him, although that wasn't quite on COVID, but we hope to have him in the next week or two. But I also found myself great access to incredible places. Within a year of being elected, I'd been to CERN. Now, we would take kids to CERN with the school, but it was different type of access. It was a more intimate access, and it was really getting to the down up close and personal with the science that was taking place. More recently, just last February, I was lucky enough to be part of a trip to NASA, which was just mind-blowing. And again, I would never have considered that as a wee physics teacher from Glasgow, I would have these opportunities. So it's been really very, very interesting. Some previous inquiries that have generated some interest. We did an inquiry on e-cigarettes a number of years ago, and that was quite some quite controversial outcomes to that. And very early on, we did an inquiry on Ebola, and it's interesting when we're now looking at our response to COVID. If we'd maybe read some of the lessons learned from our inquiry in Ebola, possibly we wouldn't have had quite as many deaths and as many people affected by COVID in the UK as we have seen tragically over the last year. So I think probably I'll stop there, because it's probably better if people ask me questions. Mark, if that's enough. I should just finish by saying, Mark, I hadn't appreciated that I was the longest serving member of the Science and Tech Committee, so now you've made me feel old, so thanks for that.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry about that, Carol. But thank you very much for the introduction. That's really good. Before I forget, first of all, thank you to Derek Young, who's just written in to say there's an equivalent hustings event for the Scottish Parliament on the 13th of April. So I'm sure details for that will be available soon. Do put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. But if I could just start off with a very generic question, Carol, especially given your Scotland base, there's an awful lot made of the common goals of science and technology, and it's a cross-party event, a cross-party institution, as they all are, of course, the select committees, and there's a lot of sense of working together, and you don't sense too much disagreement. But clearly, science education policies in particular are different across the nations of the UK. And I just wondered, sitting in Westminster, do you think the Science and Technology Select Committee make enough allowance and have enough understanding of the different impacts of policy across the nations, or do you think it is too Westminster and England focused?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. One of the things that frustrated me when I was first elected was that most of the witnesses we had were coming from an hour's train journey from London, and there wasn't that sort of reaching out to other places. Occasionally we would get somebody specially flying down from Scotland, and that was seen as a big deal. But I spoke to both the chair at that point and the clerks, and the response I got was, it's not fair to ask people to travel from so far away. And what I said to them was, it's absolutely fair to ask them, and they can decide whether they want to, respond in a positive way to our invitation. So I was quite keen to see better representation, because you're absolutely right. There are different issues in different parts of the UK, not just in terms of the four nations, but even in terms of maybe of the north of England, or if we consider the needs and requirements of Cornwall, it's going to be quite different from that in Essex, for example. So yeah, there was a real need for that. And the other thing I was keen to see was the committee moving out of London. And in that, under the first chair, it was Nicola Blackwood. We only ever made it out of London once, I think. I think once we went to the Natural History Museum or the Science Museum for a session, but the only other time we moved out of London was when we took evidence in Oxford, and I didn't think that was really stretching it too much. So beyond that, the next chair I served under was Stephen Metcalfe, who's now the chair of the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee, which is a slightly different body. And spoke to him. So the clerks always knew that if there were not enough witnesses brought in from different parts of the UK, I would get snotty about it. And snotty is a good Glasgow expression. So they started looking for that as a matter of course. And when we were doing an inquiry recently, I think it was 2 years ago now, and it was Norman Lamb was the chair that by this point, I think, and it was on quantum technologies. And I insisted that they come to Glasgow as one of the quantum technology hubs. So we'd actually visited Strathclyde University in the morning and had a Glasgow University in the afternoon and had a session then in Glasgow University. So I think there are ways you can do it. I think as members of the committee, we have to be quite forceful in asking for that. But one of the positives to come out of COVID is that actually we can get witnesses speaking to us from across the globe via Zoom. Zoom's not as good as in person, let's be honest. Being in person is always going to be the best to have real interactions, but there are so many things we can do on a platform such as this that we could never have done before. So that is something, and I would like to see when we go back to normal committee meetings in Parliament that we actually see witnesses appearing via video link. It would be a massive step forward, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure that's absolutely true. It's made it made massive difference to all sorts of things. I mean, and you've made a good case there for your sort of your Scotland view of the world making a difference to the way in which the Select Committee operates. One of the questions that's just come in from Andrew Spires is a slightly different tack on that, which he's just asking whether or not you think that given the huge breadth of issues MPs have to cover, having your physics background and teaching background has given you an advantage over some of what people might perceive as more traditional PPE or whatever backgrounds.
I don't know if it gives me an advantage. It clearly does in a science and technology select committee. Clearly it does in that, but I don't know if in general parliamentary business it does. But what it does do is introduce diversity to Parliament, because there are too many, as you say, PPE or lawyers in Parliament. I mean, that's just a standard route to becoming an MP. Do PPE at Oxbridge and then go. So I think the diversity is important, and it's important that you have people with different backgrounds and different experiences who can talk about what they talk from a position of expertise on different issues. And I think one of the problems is when you follow the traditional route into politics, if we're going to call it that, is that you don't necessarily come bringing anything new to the party. And what was interesting in 2015, when a whole pile of us were elected, 56 of the 59 seats in Scotland went to the SNP. And I would say probably half of those were from people that had no background in politics whatsoever. They were coming from medicine. There were 2 teachers in that intake. There were lawyers, of course. We had a QC, we had engineers, we had just people with a whole breadth of different experiences that were unrelated to politics. And I think that's important, rather than having a specific scientific background. I think having that diversity, and it's allowed us within the SNP to say our education spokesperson, which is myself, is a teacher. The person that sits in the Science and Technology Committee, to use me again as the example, is someone with a scientific background. So it has allowed us to kind of match people's portfolios to their expertise, which I do think is helpful, certainly helpful for me in terms of my knowledge and understanding of what we're looking at.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much. I mean, quite a few people, well, there's a diversity of questions coming in, which I'll just try and pick up on one or two of them. One really is, given the attention that's been focused on the Science and Technology Committee recently, because I guess you might say that, you know, a year ago, not everyone in the country would have known much about the work of the S&T Committee, but all of a sudden, it's become centre stage because of the current pandemic. Do you think that has changed, because you've been on it for a long time now, has it changed the way the committee operates? Has it had an impact in that sense?
I don't actually think it necessarily has. I would think we still, I mean, it's interesting. The committee is one of the few things in Parliament. There are other things in Parliament, but it's one of the few sort of public forums that's quite consensual on a cross-party basis. and probably Science and Technology Committee more than other committees, because other committees might be looking at things that are quite party political and might be poking holes in manifestos and stuff. So, for example, if you look at, I'm thinking the Human Rights Committee or Women and Equalities Committee, these might start challenging party political positions. But I think in terms of science and tech, one of the good things is the way in which we operate together. And that's not to say we don't have disagreement, because when we're trying to agree a report, the most recent, or one of the recent ones, took us nearly 3 whole days to agree. So it was a long, tough, drawn out process. I think we're more aware of the scrutiny, I would say that. And what we've had to do, because we're not all sitting in a room together, is set up I hate it, but we've set up a WhatsApp group. So whilst a witness has been questioned, somebody might put on the WhatsApp group, did he or she just say that, and didn't a previous witness, I remember a previous witness saying that, could we push on that point? And that's been really useful, because we've never been able to do that. If you're sitting in the committee room, we would never have done that before. So that's really allowed I would say, a deeper examination of some of the issues. So we are acutely aware of the scrutiny, but I don't think it's the scrutiny that's probably changed how we operate. I think it's the fact that we're having to do it virtually that's maybe changed things.
Okay, it's interesting. Yeah, thank you. And there are quite a few questions, as you might expect, coming in on COVID and funding and those sorts of things, which I think both of which we probably should come on to. There's one here from David Nicholson, and just says, could you comment on the recent budget and funding for research, and specifically Horizon Europe? And of course, as we were saying earlier, the chair of the Select Committee, Greg Clark, wrote to the Prime Minister yesterday, and they got coverage. I wrote to him today with the same thing, as that's his mind. We'll get that sort of coverage. But what do you think's next for the Select Committee on that? What might you be able to do to intervene?
Yeah, I mean, it's as I was saying earlier on, one of the kind of ongoing issues for the Select Committee is considering science funding. I mean, we've considered the sort of setup and establishment of UKRI and how all of that was going to operate. But science funding really has to be part of what we do. There's nobody in the Science and Technology Committee that's ever going to advocate for less spending on science. I think all of us are very very positive about the economic and societal impacts of science, of promoting science and science spending. What I would say though is it's quite disappointing that a year and a half ago in the Tory manifesto, science was front and centre. And although the same rhetoric has been used about science, and I think over the last year, scientists really have become far more prominent, and the importance of scientific spending has become far more prominent, it's quite disturbing to see that we're having to fight for every penny of spending. I think I've now asked 3 or 4 questions in the House over the last fortnight about the Horizon Europe funding. I mean, this was never going to be part of the base, the UKRI spend, but it looks as though it's all going to be whipped up into that. And the cuts to the ODA is really brutal. I do have a constituent that works heavily in this area, and she's now having to lay off partners in some of the most poorest countries in the world, and it's really, she's having a terrible time. And what she said was, we had a contractual obligation. We had actually already, we were partly through it when the funding was cut, and this is unprecedented, and it really is. We've never had a situation, you've always you've heard that the budgets are going to be cut, blah, 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 but you've never had a budget cut midway through, and that's what's so unusual about this, and it's very short-sighted. So yeah, I mean, when the chair sent round the draft of that letter, I think I was the first person to respond and say, absolutely, get this in and get it published. We need that out. In terms of other things the committee can do, I mean, I would like to think probably over the next few months that we do look at science funding and what's happening around that. We did have the Secretary of State for Bayes Quasi-Quartet and speaking to a committee last week, but I wasn't. I think he gets it. I think, in all honesty, I do think he gets it. But I think it's Treasury that are pulling the strings, and I think he's in a difficult situation. So that's something we need to keep pushing on. And I see us in the Science and Technology Committee being kind of at the forefront of that push for proper spend for Horizon, for UKRI, for ODA, and increase as was promised, you know,
Yeah,
which doesn't seem to be what's happening.
No, indeed. Yeah. Thanks very much, Carol. I mean, there's a point been made here by a PhD student at the University of Manchester, Gareth Moore. I mean, lots of people are affected by these sort of funding cuts and decisions generally, but clearly early career scientists are definitely affected in many different ways. And he's just making the point, you know, it's all very well talking to, you know, well-known and well-established people in the world of science, but does the Select Committee do enough effectively to call in witnesses and get the views from early career researchers and scientists?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the answer to that is no. But it is something that we have discussed. So it is something that is on our radar. I know one of the things I would like us looking at is diversity in science, and I won't say too much about that unless people ask me specifically about it. But when we were chatting about this in a private session, I said when we're talking about diversity in science, there's no point talking to those that have actually made it. You know, don't talk to the one woman in the research. Well, but yeah, talk to her, but also talk to those that didn't make it, that dropped out, that went and got a different career. Find out why they went and what wasn't in place for them. So I think yes, we could do far more. But I'll also say gently, I think early career researchers need to interact with us more as well. When an inquiry is open, anyone can put evidence into that inquiry. And I think there's this thinking that I need to be a professor, I need to have X number of years of experience before I can actually submit evidence to that. But that's not the case. And I do think the science world has to play an active role as well in actually making sure their voice is heard. So when an inquiry is open, when there's information there, or when there's a call for evidence, make sure you submit your evidence, get it in there. Email members of the committee. Now, MPs have a general sort of rule of will only respond to constituents, or generally only respond to constituents. I read almost all of the emails that come into my inbox. So if people are emailing me and saying, this is an issue, I see you've got an inquiry on X, Y, and Z, could you please pay attention to this issue, because this is something that is important to me. So I think, yes, there's a role for us, but there's also a role for early career researchers themselves. So yeah, we've both got a to-do list on that.
Okay, thanks. I mean, there's some clear messages there about how to contribute and get involved. And related to that, Sarah Matrustri has written in, as she said, it's very fresh and inspiring to hear from you. Thank you very much. But she asks about the topics that you address within the Select Committee, and says how are they selected and how are the outcomes fed back to government, something which perhaps not everyone is familiar with.
Yeah, first of all, the topics, generally the chair will meet with the members of the committee, either individually or we'll have a private session and we'll discuss issues. And that's then for members of the committee to make the case for issues that they think are important. And we'll make the case for things that we think are important if we know about them. So again, let us know about things. So we probably all come forward with a few ideas, and one of the things that I've been pushing quite strongly on is diversity in science. So that is something that I've been lobbying the committee on, and I hope that we will at some point over the next couple of years see an inquiry on that. But we then need to lobby, and we come to a fairly consensual decision. We decide that we can leave that one just now, or we can do a short inquiry, a single session inquiry on that. We can do a longer inquiry, maybe over a number of sessions on this issue, because we see that has been more important. Yeah, so we do that. But the other thing that we have done, we haven't done it in this committee, but I think because things have been rather strange over the last year, I don't think it's entirely fair. We've done a kind of Dragon's Den type scenario where we've opened up to the scientific community, and we've said, what are the issues we should be looking at? Please come to us with ideas. And the last time we did that, I think we got several hundred submissions, and every member of the committee was given a bundle of them to go and look at and read through and decide the merits of them, and probably come back with their top 3. And then as a committee, we all presented our top 3. And from that, we decided on 10 that were going to come and pitch to us. So these 10 ideas came and pitched to the committee, and they had a certain amount of time to make their case, and then a short amount of time for Q&A. So they did that, and then after that we decided what action we were taking. And pretty much if you're one of the 10, there's going to be some action. It might be that there's a letter to a minister about the issue. It might be that there's a short inquiry. It might be that there's a longer inquiry. But really, you know, like I say, the community can play their role in this, and whether we have an opportunity to do something like that again, we've done it twice over the last few years, but I'd like to see that again.
Great, thank you very much, Carol. There's one or two people are asking that a question which has come up several times before about encouraging people to go into politics who are scientists and those sorts of things. And I think we've covered that to some extent. But Alan Johnson asked that specifically. I mean, what do you think we might do to encourage more people to take up politics who've had a science background? You know, is the analytical thinking part of that really helpful for politics, handling data, understanding that?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, it's about having a range of different skills, but the difficulty is that scientists work on evidence, and they work on, you know, they look at the evidence, they draw a conclusion that must be able to be backed up by the evidence. Politicians often look at the evidence and come up with an entirely different conclusion that's backed up by nothing, and that's what we see been taken forward. So it's quite a different and at times very frustrating situation in politics. That said, that can only change if we have people from different backgrounds putting themselves forward. Like I said in my opening remarks, I could never have seen myself doing this. This was never part of the plan for me. So I would imagine many of the people listening tonight are thinking in a similar way. But it is important, if you want politics that is evidence-based and politics that can analyse data and can draw proper conclusions by looking at that, then you need people with brains that can actually cope with this. So yeah, I would encourage all of you to get involved in some way. The fact you're interacting with this event tonight shows that you have political interest. But there are other things you could do. Get in touch, see if you can get an internship, see if there are different programmes within Parliament, you know, the Parliamentary and Scientific, the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology has internships, and you know, these are available for anybody to apply to. But I would also encourage you, if you get an opportunity, and it's a pity we haven't over the last year, visit Parliament, see what goes on, get in touch with your own MP, ask them if they can show you around so you can see some of what goes on, so you can sit in a debate or sit in a committee meeting, because I mean that is available for members of the public in normal times, not at the moment, but I think these are all ways that you can get a taste for politics and start seeing how you can feed in and how you can use your expertise in a political forum.
Thanks. And again, it's probably an area where, you know, online meetings is helping exposure and people to having access to those sorts of discussions. So there are one or two questions about specific programs and structures and those sorts of things. And you may or may not want to say very much about them, but just I'll just put them to you. I mean, one from Dr. Marco Cardozi, who's based in Scotland. So what are your views on the Turing scheme as a replacement for Erasmus? And perhaps if I could do another one on structures, from Olwyn Byron from the University of Glasgow, who says that Blue Skies research is supported to a large extent by UKRI, responsive mode funding, etc. What are your views on the potential for confusion, fragmentation and underfunding of well-established streams because of the new ARIA research agency? So one on the Erasmus scheme, one on the new ARIA.
Okay, so I'll start with Erasmus. The Erasmus supposed replacement Turing scheme. To me, it's no replacement at all. It is not even, doesn't come close to doing what Erasmus did. And one of the reasons for Turing rather than Erasmus, or one of the reasons given, was Erasmus made it difficult for young people because they were having to learn a foreign language in order to study abroad. Now, for me, that's one of the benefits of Erasmus, and we certainly know that many of the Erasmus schemes and positions that are available to young people are in English anyway, so it's just such a poor example. But the real richness of Erasmus is about young people being able to come here to the UK as well and set up and start understanding different cultures and experiencing different things. Now, I know it's different in other parts of the UK, but here in Scotland, we struggle to get people to come here to Scotland. We had, certainly before we joined the EU, way back, or before the freedom of movement, our population was elderly and dwindling. So to have young people coming here was really important, and to have freedom of movement. And it's one of the things that's a big concern, but I'm not going to get into all of the Brexit carry on just now, but it's a big concern that we're not going to have the same opportunities for people to come here and bring their skills to Scotland. So the Turing scheme doesn't allow this inward exchange, so I have real issues with it. It also doesn't allow a lot of the youth work that took place under Erasmus as well. So it seems, although the Prime Minister is reporting it as something better than, and opportunities for youngsters from a disadvantaged background, I'm sorry, I can't see it as that. And I can't see youngsters from a disadvantaged background taking advantage of this in the way that he seems to think they will do. So I'm really, really upset, and I'll use that. I know it's an emotive word. I'm upset to see the end of Erasmus. My son, by the way, did Erasmus 2 years ago in France, and so he had a fabulous experience. He probably drank too much wine and spoke too much French, but at the end of it, he came back probably a better person as a result of that, and that's what we want. He wants to go and work in Europe now as a result of that, and you know, so I'm sad to see the end of it, and I hope that we can. Certainly, I know there are moves from the Scottish Government to see if we can pay to be part of the Erasmus scheme, but I don't think at the moment we're having much joy with that. ARIA, goodness, ARIA, the body that has no goal, no target, but plenty of money and no checks and balances on how the money is spent. It's one of these difficult situations, because I don't want to criticise additional spend in science. I'm just not convinced it is additional spend in science. It's 800 million, and if we look over the course of 4 years, whatever, 200 million a year, something like that, which is pretty much it's very similar to the amounts, for example, of ODA that's just been cut, and it's half the amount that we would pay for our Horizon Europe membership. So I'm not convinced it is additional money. The other concern I have, and this is if we think of the amount of public money that has been spent without checks and balances, I think it's one of my colleagues called it coronavirus. But the money that's been spent without checks and balances over the last 12 months should alert us to the potential that of similar happening with ARIA. How do we? Dominic Cummings gave evidence to our committee last week on ARIA, and he talked about extreme freedom and freedom from bureaucracy, and it kept mentioning the word freedom and freedom from the difficulties of research applications, grant applications, and freedom from this and freedom from that. And to me, it's freedom from scrutiny, and that's what I worry about. Who's getting the money? Why are they getting the money? And if there was a target for it, I think maybe we would be a bit happier about it. If the target was, for example, to develop a vaccine for COVID, I don't think anybody would argue with spending money on that. But to just decide to set up a body when you don't really know what it's supposed to do, I have pretty serious concerns about that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I mean, we're very close to running out of time, Carol. So if it's all right with you, I'll just throw at you a few very quick questions, perhaps for some very short answers, if that's possible. One, just following on from that, it must have been an interesting time when I watched the evidence when Dominic Cummings was before your committee. He made some statements which got a lot of coverage on the Department of Health and their failings. Did that tie in with the evidence you heard from other people?
Some of it did. Some of it did when he was talking about the slowness of response. So yeah, I think we were aware of that. Some of it seemed like finger pointing and blame apportioning, when we have to remember that he was at the very core of government and was there as the Prime Minister's right-hand man. So if anyone could have influenced what happened in those early stages of the pandemic, he could have. So I had difficulty accepting all of his evidence.
Okay, thank you. And Narinder Ramanani says, in your experience, can you give an example of the real impact that your reports have had when you've done something? Where do you think you've had really big impact?
Oh, that's a great question. Probably the biggest impact we had in terms of public interest, other than COVID, has been the e-cigarettes, the inquiry on e-cigarettes, which and our conclusions were that e-cigarettes were probably were better for your health than regular cigarettes. I don't think we said at any point that they were wonderful, but we said it. But this got quite a lot of press coverage, and we saw. And I'm not sure, does that count as impact? Did we see change as a result? I'm not sure. I'd need to think more carefully about that. So sorry.
Yeah, it's not easy to give a short answer to that. And just finally, Katie Perry from the Daphne Jackson Trust says, do you ever revisit inquiries you've had to see how things have progressed?
Yeah, actually that's part of the process, because we take evidence, we write a report, we agree the report, we publish the report, and then we expect a government response. And once we get the government response, we will then decide as a committee, are we happy with that government response? Do we want to push it further? So even within the actual inquiry itself, there is an opportunity to revisit and take sort of additional evidence once the report is published. But maybe we do need to look back further, and occasionally we will actually, particularly around issues like science funding, which are an ongoing thing. So we would look back at reports on that. Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much. Well, we are, in fact, out of time at exactly 7 o'clock. I'm really sorry to everyone whose question I haven't put to Carol, but there were a huge number, actually. So thank you very much for that level of engagement, both here and on Twitter. Carol, is there anything you'd just like to conclude with before we finish?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thanks very much to everyone for attending, and please, I mean, use your elected representatives, either your own MPs, councillors, MPs, MSPs if you're in Scotland, or MPs that are on the committee. If you've got things that you want to get, I mean, the easiest way to get in touch is email, but you can also use Twitter, or you can put evidence into inquiries, but please use us. We are there and we are accessible, but you know, you need to instigate it. So let us know you're there, and let us hear your ideas. Thanks very much. Thanks to everyone joining us, and thanks to you, Mark, for hosting tonight.
Not at all, and yeah, so thank you very much, Carol, for giving up your time again, and you've been a great supporter of science and of the society, so thank you for that. For those of you who are willing, please do fill in the survey, which you can post in the chat. That would be very, very much appreciated. This recording will be available shortly on our YouTube channel, and that, just to remind everyone, the hashtag is hashtag RSB Engage Parliament for tonight's events. So thank you all very much. We will be having another one of these events in a month or so's time, so sort of keep an eye on our website and the events pages. Thank you very much. I hope everyone has a really good evening. Thanks, Carol. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.